War for the Planet of the Apes is set 2 years after the events of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and tells the story of Caesar and the apes continuing to struggle and battle against a military front named the Alpha Omega. I feel a little bit bittersweet, guys, because this is one of my most anticipated movies of the year. I've been anticipating this movie since the end of Dawn, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Literally, I love Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And now it's over. It's a little bit sad, but now I get to talk about it with all of you. So after the events of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, shit has hit the fan for Caesar and the apes. You're getting constant assaults from this military group. Apes are dying left and right. You even have some apes that have abandoned the group and have gone and joined up with the Alpha Omega in order to take down Caesar. There's tons of drama going on, and what a wild way and a really emotional way to wrap up this trilogy. I'm telling you guys, it is mind-blowing how good these prequel Planet of the Apes films have been. Back before Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out, if you'd have just told me or wrote it on paper that we're going to do a CGI-heavy Planet of the Apes prequel film, it sounds like it is destined to fail. It sounds like it's just going to be a mediocre cash grab. And I'm telling you, these three films have been some of the most emotional and gripping films that you will ever experience. And that is mostly due to the character of Caesar, who is probably the greatest character that has been brought to film in the past 10 to 15 years. What Andy Serkis is able to do time and time again with his motion capture performances is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable how much emotion he gets out of this ape Caesar that is completely CGI, and how many emotions he gets out of the audience to feel towards Caesar in every single one of these movies. And starting off with my first positive of War for the Planet of the Apes, Andy Serkis and Caesar once again just knock it out of the park.
A better world will emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past. A world founded upon faith and understanding. A world dedicated to the wish for freedom.
One of the reasons why Caesar is one of the best and one of the most rich and deep characters that we've gotten in movies in a very long time is because in each one of these movies, they really show a growth and they show a different side of the character. In Rise, we got to see him as he grew up and he was a little bit naive and kind of blind to how the horrors of the world work, and really got to understand where his alliances needed to fall by the end of that movie. In Dawn, we get to see Caesar as a leader and the symbol of hope and symbol of leadership and symbol of knowledge, who's basically the moral compass and the direction for this entire race. And while a lot of that side of Caesar carries over into War for the Planet of the Apes, in War we get to see a lot more of his battle-hardened side. We get to see a lot more of his darker elements. We get to see him with a vengeance-fueled heart. And it once again just builds upon and really progresses everything that we know and love about Caesar from the previous movies, while taking him in a new direction, continuing to flesh him out, and continuing to build up why Caesar is one of the greatest characters that has ever been in movies. And while he's done it plenty of times in the other two movies, Andy Serkis really gets to dive into the emotional side of things and the emotional side of this character in War for the Planet of the Apes. Some of the events and some of the struggles that Caesar goes through in this movie by far are some of the darkest and some of the most gut-wrenching events that we have seen this character go through. And Andy Serkis totally sells you on all of the apes' emotions and draws every single emotion possible out of the viewers while watching Caesar go through this journey. Not exaggerating, there is more than a few moments in this when your jaw will hit the floor and you might even shed a tear or two while watching Caesar go through the journey that he goes through in this chapter of his story. But Caesar's not the only one who's back from the previous movies. We also get the rest of his gang. We get Rocket, we get Maurice, and those two characters are so great because not only are they very different, but it's so good to see those characters carry through from where they were at the beginning of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Rocket wasn't even really a friend of Caesar. Maurice was kind of like the silent, smart guy in the room. And the way that those characters have all kind of grown together and have this budding friendship and brotherhood together, it's awesome to see them once again just develop that relationship on screen. Rocket has turned into a really fun character to watch because he is definitely kind of the muscle of the group. He's like the protector, especially now that Koba's out of the way. He's definitely the one who wants to defend Caesar the most. And Maurice is always a really interesting character because he's definitely the brains behind the operation. Even though he follows Caesar's rule, he's kind of the moral compass and the one that kind of keeps keeps Caesar reined in and keeps him grounded a little bit. And his story in this movie, especially whenever he starts getting involved with Nova, the young girl, is incredible because we get to see the most emotion and the most growth out of that character in War for the Planet of the Apes than the other two movies combined.
We cannot take her, Maurice.
And we also get the introduction of a new ape character, Bad Ape, and this guy was hilarious. You know, he's one of those characters that if he was in a lesser film, he would be annoying and he would be a distraction from all the gravity and all the emotion going on in the story, but he really provides much needed levity throughout this movie. There's only about 2 or 3 genuinely funny scenes that he's in, which is more than enough. You don't want to go too much with the humor, but they all land perfectly and they don't feel like distractions. They don't feel like this wildly out of place scene.
Learn to speak.
Listen, human. Bad ape. Bad ape.
Partially due to the fact that he is voiced by Steve Zahn, who is a very funny actor that I've always been a big fan of. And I was actually surprised whenever I left the movie and started looking up the cast and realized that that was Steve Zahn's voice, because it was a little bit familiar to me. But the way, if you know Steve Zahn's version of humor, it really comes through in this ape. And I loved that section of the movie. It was a really important piece that I'm glad that they introduced.
Oh no! No, 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 no. Okay.
And while I'm speaking about the apes, let me go ahead and talk about the CGI in this, because once again, just like in Rise, just like they improved on in Dawn, and just like they've basically perfected in this movie, the CGI, especially surrounding the apes and their emotions and the way their facial expressions go and the look of the fur, and especially a lot of the weather elements that they get in this, like with the snow, God, I don't see how you could ever do CGI better than they have done in this Apes franchise. It's almost like they have set the bar so freaking high that I cannot see another film franchise doing the innovations that they have brought in CGI that the Apes franchise has. It is mind-blowingly good.
Bad place. Human zoo. Bad human.
Bad humans. Soldiers. Soldiers.
Now, our main human character this time around is a colonel played by Woody Harrelson, and Woody Harrelson is one of the most underrated actors out there. He's never a guy that you hear in a conversation of greatest actors of all time, or one of the greatest performers of all time, or Oscar-worthy contenders, or anything like that. But this dude, every single time I have ever seen him, and he plays a lot of different types of roles, just brings it 100%, and he does it yet again in War for the Planet of the Apes. He was a great human character because not only does he have that really scary and evil and sinister side to him, but just like one of the many things that they have nailed in this Apes franchise with some of the other human characters in the previous movies, you totally understand their motivations for what they are doing. I mean, at the end of the day, if we were alive in this reality, we're on Team People. So we would be on Woody Harrelson's side to a degree. You see these apes, yes, we created them, yes, we basically created the virus, but they literally are a threat to the survival of humanity. And even though he is played to be the villain in this, and he's definitely a little bit more evil than most of the other human characters that we've gotten in a couple of the previous movies, you understand why he wants to do what he's doing. You understand that he is only really trying to preserve humanity, trying to preserve the human race. Even though he's got some sinister ways of going about it, you understand completely that it is kill or be killed to this guy. And despite all of the things going on in the story of War for the Planet of the Apes, some of the best and most gripping scenes of the entire movie are the scenes whenever Woody Harrelson and Caesar are just in a room with each other, talking to each other.
Have you finally come to save your apes?
I came for you.
As far as the story of War for the Planet of the Apes, one thing that I love that they have done great with this prequel trilogy of Apes films is that each movie feels like a perfect and natural progression of the story in the movie that came before it. Dawn felt like the perfect progression from Rise, and War feels like the perfect progression from Dawn. This is one of those few third chapters in a franchise that truly does feel like resolution. It feels like the end game. It feels like everything is coming to fruition, everything is making its way full circle, and everything has this sense of finality to it. And that really ups the stakes, that really ups the tension, and that really ups the viewer's investment into what is going on, because you just get this entire sense of finality in every single scene in this movie. And honestly, that's one of the best things that I like about this chapter. I love a movie that has that sense of definitiveness, to where it's not worried about setting up a franchise or setting up further movies or leaving tail ends to be told in stories later on. It's just focused on wrapping up the story that's come before it in an awesome concluding chapter. And ultimately, that's the best way to describe War for the Planet of the Apes, is an awesome concluding chapter. And beyond the sense of finality, another thing that I really love that they did with this story is they really put a lot of different genres and a lot of different tones into the story of War for the Planet of the Apes, and they all make it flow perfectly. It starts off and you definitely feel like you're thick in the middle of the heart of a war movie, and then it kind of turns into this revenge tale, and then you even get a prison break segment. There's so many things going on, and especially the prison break segment really tries to bring everything full circle, since Rise is heavily a prison break movie. So I really liked how they kind of tied back to that. They really made it feel a little bit deeper this time around, and again just brings everything full circle, which is something you definitely want to do in the concluding chapter of a trilogy. I also really loved the score to this movie. It's got all those classic Planet of the Apes score elements with the kind of the jungle sounds and the primitive sounds like the flutes and the drums, and all of that is great, not only for nostalgia, but it definitely fits the tone and the setting and the characters of this movie. But this one, especially for War, definitely has that war and battle hymn flavor to it here and there. It feels like the score grows with the movie. It feels like it really adds to the scenes and really adds to the flow of the story. And whenever a score can do that, whenever it can add to the movie, that's a good thing. And finally, I want to end with talking about the director, Matt Reeves, because I really feel like this Apes prequel trilogy really went to the next level when Matt Reeves came on. I loved what Rupert did with the first movie, and I couldn't believe anybody was going to do it besides him whenever they were announcing a new director for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. But he really just brought it up to a completely different notch and blew away everything that I loved about Rise. And he did that once again here in War for the Planet of the Apes. It's a great finish to his trilogy. He really understands the way that you really need to go about this story, with focusing on the apes, focusing on their struggle. You have the human characters, but you definitely want to focus on Caesar and Maurice and Rocket and their families, their struggles, their emotions. And he just really brings it to that level that is unlike any other movie trilogy that you've ever seen, or really any kind of storytelling that you've ever seen. The way that they use the CGI, the way that they really evoke a lot of emotions just with facial expressions and a lot of close-up shots. And honestly, if they ever do decide to continue this franchise, if Matt Reeves is not involved in it, I'm going to be really nervous for what's going on, because I feel like he is the big cog that makes this wheel turn, and I'm really excited going forward with what's he going to do with like the Batman or any other franchise that he decides to take on, because he is just a phenomenal director, and he is a big part of why this trilogy is so damn great. To be honest, I really don't have any strong negatives with this movie. I have a couple of nitpicks and a little bit of confusion with a few things, namely the way that the apes speak to each other. Even in Dawn, I had a little bit of confusion with it, why Caesar and Koba were the only ones speaking in full sentences almost, but it carries over into this. Caesar, obviously, it makes sense that he's the one with the most knowledge and the most use of his words, and he speaks the most fluently of all the apes because he's been smart longer. But with the other apes, you get random characters that can speak almost as well as Caesar, like Red, one of the gorillas that betrayed the group. You get Maurice that speaks every once in a while, but every other ape character only speaks in the sign language and the subtitles. And I just don't really understand exactly what's preventing them from learning how to speak, or what's preventing them from gaining that knowledge over time. It just seems like that's something that they would have learned by now. And I don't know if this has been explained in previous movies. Go ahead and correct me down below if I'm missing something, but it just seems odd that Caesar continues to grow with his ability to speak, and a couple of the other characters seem to be growing along with him, even his son, Blue Eyes, but the other characters just seem to be stuck in that primitive language. I've never understood that quite a bit, and that's not a really big negative with this movie, because I love the way that they utilize the sign language and the subtitles and the language of the apes. It's just a little confusing for me. As far as a small negative with the pace of the movie, I feel like the movie is really front-loaded. Don't get me wrong, it's really tense and it's really deep throughout the entire runtime, but it feels like all of the biggest moments, all of the biggest tension, and all of the biggest jaw-dropping scenes happens in the first act of the movie, and the movie never quite gets up to that level throughout the rest of the runtime to me. Everything in the first act is kind of like almost like the climax of what's going on, and everything else is resolution or fallout of that climax. And going along with that, my last small nitpick is that I feel like the ultimate confrontation in the third act between Woody Harrelson and Caesar didn't quite get to the epic scales that I was expecting it to get to. It definitely didn't match up to the fight between Koba and Caesar and the level that their confrontation built up to in the third act of Dawn. It was definitely much more of a small-scaled confrontation, and I was a little disappointed in that, just a little bit. I understand why they resolved it that way. I understand why, as far as Caesar's character growth and kind of the way to wrap up his story in this third chapter, why it had to end the way that it ended. But to me, it just felt like it could have been a little bit more grand. It kind of felt like it petered out a little bit. And the last really big positive that I want to give to this movie, because it's the first of this trilogy to really hammer down on this side of the storytelling, I feel like all of the little teasers and Easter eggs and lead-ins to the original movie Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston was done perfectly in this. It didn't feel like it was shoehorned in. It didn't feel like it was distracting or it was like obligatory to set up the further movie or to tie everything all in or anything like that. It felt like a natural progression of the story. It felt like it fit this story perfectly. It felt like it fit the franchise perfectly, and everything down to the character of Nova, how she got her name Nova, the way that the apes kind of find the area that they are found in Planet of the Apes, as far as the desert setting, as far as why humans have lost the ability to speak and the ability to think for themselves and have much more of a primitive way that they act towards each other. All of that was explained perfectly. It was utilized perfectly, and that's one of the few times that I've seen a prequel movie do that as perfectly as this one. Usually whenever you start doing tie-ins and lead-ins and Easter eggs, it starts to distract from the story, or it feels weird, or they don't execute it perfectly, or there's a lot of conveniences here and there, and it feels like it was just thrown in for the sake of having a little aha moment. None of that is here. It was awesome. And that's a really important thing to do, because at the end of the day, there is plenty of people who are going to see these new incarnation of Planet of the Apes films who were fans of the original movie and the original franchise. And it's great to give little winks and nods to those fans, little moments where they can feel like that was thrown in there specifically for them, and be able to weave it into this story perfectly, where it does not distract everybody who maybe doesn't understand what those references are for. But even despite those small nitpicks, people, I cannot recommend War for the Planet of the Apes enough. I cannot recommend this trilogy enough. Again, we have one of the greatest trilogies of all time. You got Back to the Future, you got Indiana Jones, the original Star Wars trilogy, and now Planet of the Apes is a part of that conversation, and that is awesome. It's always good when you finally get 3 movies in a row that wrap up the story perfectly. They all feel like they are on this extreme level of quality, an extreme level of engagement, an extreme level of emotion, and I love the way they wrapped all of this up. I'm totally satisfied if they don't continue from here. I definitely would like to see some more stories, but if this is it, I'm totally fine with the ending that they gave us to Caesar's story in War for the Planet of the Apes. So if you're a fan of these Planet of the Apes prequels, hopefully you're in the theater right now and not listening to me. If you're not a fan of this franchise, you need to get on that shit. And then after you're done watching Rise and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, go to the theaters, check this thing out, and then whenever it comes out on Blu-ray, go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of War for the Planet of the Apes? Do we have another perfect trilogy? Do you feel like this movie let you down a little bit? What's your favorite of the Planet of the Apes films? And is Caesar one of, if not the greatest character that we have gotten on film in the past 10 or 15 years? Put all of your thoughts on Caesar and the Planet of the Apes movies down in the comment section below, and we'll talk about it. Please like and share this video, and hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. That way you get to come back and check out my future content. If you want to check out my social media links, they're down below for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and my new Patreon page, which is a great way to support this channel and help it grow, as well as get a lot of exclusive content for you and have direct influence into what I bring to this channel, because you can pick your own movie either once or monthly, depending on what type of patron you want to become. So definitely check all that out, and if you want to check out some more of my videos, you can check out a few more by clicking right over here.